That was my first ever time seeing really the impact and scale of cybersecurity attacks and how they happen.
5 years at Microsoft building enterprise security, he discovered something companies don't want to admit.
We're seeing customer data or source code or internal strategy documents, right, being fed into these generative AI applications. And that's already happening. Shadow AI. In this case, a lot of companies and security teams, they just don't know what AI applications are even out there within their company. They'll probably just never stumble upon that document or that Excel sheet or whatever it might be in this case. But with the world of AI, in just a couple of clicks, it will go and search every asset that it has access to, and it can come back with results.
Every company has their top AI initiative that triples their budget. There's a problem.
They're thinking through, hey, this will actually change our whole organization. Without that trust layer, you couldn't do a lot of these big applications and these big innovations that companies want to do.
This is Harris Sohail on AI Hacks.
Welcome to AI Hacks with Liana. I'm Liana Temescu, the founder of SunnyLabs.ai, which is the top AI cybersecurity platform that ensures AI agents are developed securely, privately, and in a compliant way. In a nutshell, we stop AI agents and chatbots from getting hacked. We also create educational content and courses on developing and using AI securely. Let's get started.
Hello everyone, and hello Harris. So for everyone listening, we have a very exciting episode today about enterprise security in the age of AI. So today we have Harris Sohail, who is a product manager in Microsoft, where he has worked extensively on the product Microsoft Defender for Cloud, which I previously also worked on. Let's get started. Welcome, Harris.
Yeah, thanks, Liana. I'm really glad to be here.
Great. So first question for yourself is, can you tell me about yourself? Which sounds very much like an interview question, but talk to me about why did you get started in cybersecurity, and why are you interested in this space overall?
Yeah, definitely. That's a great intro question, I think. For me, I would say, interestingly, when I got into college, I was studying computer science, and at the time, when I thought of cybersecurity, I actually viewed it as more of a kind of a boring area. I was thinking like, hey, it's not really my problem. I want to work on something else, and security is just something that you have to do, just on the side, basically. But then I got my first ever role at a cybersecurity company during my college time, which was at RSA Security, and that was a role more focused on kind of fraud analysis. So think of stopping phishing campaigns, malware campaigns. And really, that was my first ever time seeing really the impact and scale of cybersecurity attacks and how they happen. And these weren't just like small one off attacks, these were really intricate, coordinated attacks going on that would steal people's credentials, really cause a lot of harm in the world. And really seeing the scale of how often that would happen and how intricate these kind of attacks would be was pretty eye opening to me. So that was kind of my first ever fledge into cybersecurity, and that's when I started viewing it as, hey, this is really an interesting area where there are tough problems to solve as well if you're working backwards and trying to stop these types of attacks. So I started focusing a lot more of my coursework within college on cybersecurity as well, both more on like the theoretical side with like cryptography type of classes, learning about encryption schemes, all the way to more practical types of classes on just computer security and how to actually enable security for companies as well. So um, that was kind of my intro to the space as well. From there, I landed up at Microsoft. As you mentioned, right, I work as a product manager in the Defender for Cloud, which is our cloud security group here. Um, when I started, my charter was fairly simple. It said, hey, we want to build out an enterprise API security program. So build it out, basically. And so I did an internship. And when I came back full time, my focus was just that. If we were to deliver a solution to our customers for API security, what would that look like? So that's what I've been working on here for the past almost 5 years now. I've also delved into other areas as well, including AI security and container security as well, but really have a deep understanding now of how security overall works for enterprises, how they think about this problem, and the types of solutions that you need to kind of meet enterprise scale as well. But in terms of just a personal like interest, like what keeps me still motivated to work in cybersecurity, I really do have a belief that cybersecurity is really like the trust layer for companies, right? It's not just something that you have to think about on the side. It's really what drives innovation as well. Without that trust layer, you couldn't do a lot of these big applications and these big innovations that companies want to do, right? You need to have trust at kind of the topmost priority there, and cybersecurity is a big enabler of that trust layer as well.
Yeah. And I love that at first, as you said, you were studying computer science. And when you first hear of cybersecurity, especially when you're quite young, um, this is something that I'm speaking from experience, that it doesn't sound that interesting. It doesn't sound that immediately cool, or at least it didn't to me a few years ago. But then when you look into it, when you look into what it actually is all about, it is fascinating. And there's just so much scope to what can happen, what maybe, malicious people are doing, and then what the defenders are ultimately working on. So I love hearing that you had a similar experience, actually, that once you got into it, realized how fascinating it is. So you've been at Microsoft now for 5 years. Wow. Um, can you tell me some of the trends that you are seeing? Perhaps let's start with cybersecurity. Some of the kind of trends that you're seeing, how enterprises are looking at cybersecurity, and then we can also look at some of the trends around AI and then AI security as well.
Yeah, definitely. I'll say I'll keep this more focused just to the area of cloud security for the most part, because this is still like a pretty hot topic in general for cybersecurity all up.
Yeah.
And I'd say it kind of varies when it comes to larger organizations, right? When you think of enterprises, I basically just think the difference is whatever you're doing, think about it at scale, basically. Like, how would you enable this across hundreds or thousands of teams, right? Thousands of developers? How would you enable a security program like that? So um, that's where I see like the differences lie between something like a small and medium-sized business, for example. So just to kind of shine some light on that, nowadays, at least in enterprise security, cloud security is one of the core pillars of security. Along with network security and email security and other kind of core pillars of security, you have cloud security up there. Whereas when you look at more small and medium-sized businesses, right, I would say cloud security is still a little bit more of a niche topic per se. So like your typical CISO or typical company in a small, medium-sized business, they might still focus on the core elements of cybersecurity, like your network security domain, your email security domain, um, endpoint security, for example, and a few others. Whereas cloud security is still a little bit more niche, and we're still figuring out what will be the program around that as well. So, but we are seeing that's changing as well. So that's basically one of the biggest trends is we're seeing that, hey, the adoption of cloud, the mindset that, hey, it's not just a cloud provider's problem for solving cybersecurity. There's a shared responsibility model. That's really coming through here, and I'm seeing that very much here within the past year or so as well. Um, Beyond that, within the enterprise space, I would say the biggest difference is a few years back when cloud security was rolling out, the bigger focus was really on infrastructure and kind of securing the overall cloud infrastructure itself. So think of this as more kind of control plane configuration. So as teams are building out and shipping applications into virtual machines or containerized workloads, have you actually secured the virtual machine itself? Do you have the right toggles in place to make sure that only the people that should be able to access it have access? And your more typical layers of security, ensuring encryption is there, ensuring stuff is hidden behind a private network, for example. So those types of elements of security is what most of the focus has been for the last couple of years. But very recently, there's been a trend of actually moving one layer deeper, really at the application layer. So thinking more about the actual code that's embedded within the application or the APIs that are exposed within the application. This is where there's a big focus now, and really it makes sense when you look at the attacks going on right now. They're kind of using this application layer to basically bypass all of the security measures that were put in place at the infrastructure layer. So we're seeing a lot of trends in that direction as well. And I think that's one of the biggest focus areas that we're seeing enterprises move into. And this is well reflected in a lot of the kind of open source kind of research projects out there as well, like the OWASP organization and many others as well. So I think that's some of the 1 to 2 kind of biggest trends I've been seeing so far there.
Great. Yeah. And it's interesting that, cloud security, even though it's now been around for so long, it's still in a way only gaining traction. Like like sometimes when somebody is particularly working on on a thing, and on an area, they think, okay, everyone else is also, looking at this. However, so if an organization or an enterprise is looking at cloud security now, they think, oh, everyone else must be looking at it too. But actually, you'll find that there will always be people that still haven't, that are going to look at it at a later stage. So that's why it's still a thing. It's still a thing, yeah. So I'm curious about how AI is maybe just overall before we get into how AI is looking at security, how AI is changing cybersecurity for enterprises. What are some of the AI trends that you're seeing in enterprises overall? Because we've talked a lot on the podcast so far, and some of the other episodes about maybe how some smaller organizations are using AI, but how are you seeing enterprises now using AI or thinking about AI?
Yeah, definitely. I think AI is a very interesting category on its own. Like it introduced a whole new category of risks that most organizations aren't quite ready yet, or they're still kind of figuring out their strategy for it. But in general, in terms of AI, like not thinking about cybersecurity, but just adoption in enterprises, I would say the most interesting part is pretty much every company I've talked with, they have AI and AI innovation as one of their top initiatives. Basically, top down, hey, as a company, we need to focus on this thing, right? So that's something that I've seen here for the past year or so. It's been a huge, huge part, right? They're thinking, how do we build AI applications for pretty much our entire organization? How would we make stuff more efficient through AI in this case? So that's definitely a big initiative going down. And as always, with any new type of topic like that, security just kind of catches up in the background, right? So we'll get to that part here in a bit as well. But just in general for AI adoption, I think what's been most interesting is within the last year or last 2 years, typically companies would have a set allocation or set budget for AI innovation, right? Like, hey, these are innovation projects. We want to see what we can do here with AI. But recently, that's kind of changed now. So now organizations have doubled or tripled their budgets for AI in this case, and they now have it more part of a recurring budget. Like on every single year, it's now treated just kind of like infrastructure in this case that they have to pay for rather than some separate innovation budget. So that's been a really cool trend. I think the other part is when these AI applications first started coming out, people would kind of relate them more so to chatbot style applications, right? This would be your co-pilot style applications, right? You send something to a ChatGPT like application that comes back with a response, and that's still, of course, the biggest trend for AI. Most companies are still at that level, just thinking about how these chatbot applications, how to connect it with certain company data, and how to even give that access to their employers or employees in this case. But really, within the past 6 months, the past like a year as well, we've also seen this trend of moving more towards agent-based AI applications, right? So not just thinking about Chat GPT or kind of a chat applications, but really how do you integrate AI into core application, basically processes in this case. So how do you actually automate end-to-end processes for different types of businesses or different types of business units within the organization as well? So this isn't just touching like engineering departments and touching like their IDE environments and VS Code environment, for example, but really every single environment that you may have across marketing, across finance, across HR. They're thinking through how to basically embed AI and as like a core element of their day-to-day processes, basically. So that's been a really interesting trend. There's a lot of learning and a lot of experimenting going on in that way as well.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And I really want to talk more about some of the AI agent examples. But actually, the first question that I have is around what you said earlier there is how fast enterprises are adopting AI or how they're changing sort of their models around adopting AI, where it's specifically embedded in what they're doing as a core piece rather than a sort of a side function. What are some of the factors that you think are influencing how fast enterprises are adopting AI? And the reason why I ask that is because I'm seeing some enterprises or some organizations altogether just generally speaking, some organizations are adopting AI very quickly, whereas others not as quickly, or they're saying they're adopting AI, but in reality it's taking a long time. For one example is I've heard of even universities in um, here in Ireland, looking to adopt AI, but realistically, it can take several years before they get some of these AI projects out. Whereas other organizations are like, I need something, and then they have it out within a week or 2 weeks. What are some of the factors for all of this?
Yeah, definitely. And it's a great point as well. Like, no one enterprise is the same in this case. Really, I think of it in different sectors in this case as well. So, typically, when you look at sectors that fall under more regulatory compliance standards, those are the ones that basically have to drive innovation following compliance, which is a very difficult thing to do. And these are the ones that will be a little bit more slower to adopt any new trend. It's not just AI, but even when you think about cloud or any new kind of a trend that's come out in technology, it takes a little bit longer for them to actually go and adopt this at scale, just because of all the regulatory compliance measures and checks that they have to make sure they meet, right? So when I think about these companies, this will include your finance companies, your healthcare companies, and then I would say the upmost ones, the ones that have the highest restrictions. This would be your typical like critical infrastructure companies, right, or government companies as well. These are the ones that, or basically just government entities in this case. Those are the ones that have, I would say, the longest time to basically adopt any new type of trend in this case. Um, but everybody else, especially like software companies, for example, they always have the mindset of, hey, let's move fast, let's break things in this case, and that's where you're seeing like, hey, we'll adopt new AI applications, and then we'll figure it out kind of from there. So it really depends on how risk averse the company is. That's what I would say in terms of like how we're seeing adoption. The other interesting part with AI is since it's rolled out so quickly, global regulation is still basically catching up, right? So this is where not even just by sector, but if you look by like by geography, where companies have to cater to, that's where we're seeing differences too, right? Within the US, I would say it's a little bit more lax today as well. It's more per state actually in the US, which is interesting, right? So certain states have like data privacy and governance laws. So some of those come under the purview when it comes to rolling out AI applications. But if you look at other countries as well, like for example, in the EU, they have like the EU Act, which is about to become enforceable. And that one's quite more stringent, right? Really focused on AI. And really, companies have to figure out, and this takes some time, like how will they actually meet these different compliance standards that are being rolled out in there. We're also seeing, for example, China, for example, they're rolling out a new labeling act as well, where I think every AI model has to be labeled or watermarked in this case, right? So if something is outputted by AI, it has to be marked accordingly. So these types of compliance measures, right when they come out, companies want to scramble or can't really scramble to get stuff out quickly. They have to make sure that they meet all the requirements that are going up, right? Otherwise, they can face very heavy fines or have other kind of repercussions as well.
Before we continue, I want to take a moment to tell you about something that I'm incredibly passionate about, and that's the work that we're doing at my company, sunnylabs.ai. As AI becomes more integrated into our daily business operations, we're seeing a critical gap in security. AI applications are getting hacked left and right through sophisticated attacks like prompt injections and data breaches, and most organizations don't even realize they're vulnerable. And that is exactly why I founded sunnylabs.ai. We're an AI cybersecurity platform specifically designed to make AI applications secure, like chatbots and AI agents, and to stop them from getting hacked. We help ensure that AI agents and chatbots can be developed securely, privately, and in a compliant way with the likes of GDPR and the EU AI Act. So we give organizations the confidence to keep innovating without compromising on security. But we don't just provide the technology, we also create educational content and courses about the secure use and development of AI. Because ultimately, the best defense starts with actually understanding all of the risks. Plus, we work directly with companies to help them to develop their AI strategies and implementations securely from the ground up. With hundreds of companies already using our platform and with major AI compliance regulations like the EU AI Act coming into effect, there's never been a better time to get your AI security right. If you're working with AI in your organization, or if you're curious about how to implement AI securely, check out sunnylabs.ai. That's SONNYLABS.ai. Now, let's get back to our conversation.
Yeah, yeah. I think it's a really great point. So if there's an organization that wants to adopt AI practices or have built their own sort of AI or AI workflows or AI agents, what do you think what do you think is the starting point for them to kind of go about this? And what are some best practices for them to follow? I mean, more from an organizational perspective rather than from a kind of a technical perspective. So, for example, like you talked about risk tolerance. Um, how should they look at risk tolerance? And then we can, this is more from again, from maybe an organizational perspective. We'll definitely talk about some of the technology piece around AI security, which is a big topic. But yeah, what are your thoughts on the maybe like in terms of policies or processes that organizations should look at?
Yeah, definitely. I would say that the biggest one is kind of thinking about AI similar to how they would treat other fundamental areas of security as well, right? So even how they view a cloud security program, where a lot of companies they'll have a review council, a whole formal process on, hey, these are the best practices that development teams have to go through before building, cloud applications, right? Here's kind of our checklist. Here's our kind of day-to-day best practices. Here are policies that we will enforce either in some audit mode or in a deny mode to make sure that you're following best practices as well. So that is what I would say is kind of that higher level, like you need kind of a governance process. And we're seeing that come across as well. Like a lot of companies, they're hiring kind of AI governance officers or AI officers in the space really to help embed and kind of come up with these processes for the first time as well. So that is one part to it. So that will include just your general areas of security, right? How do we do inventory? How do we prevent shadow AI applications? How do we figure out which data is going where? So that's where that comes into play. Now, more in practice, like when we see actual enterprises rolling this out, right? Because they're still figuring this out at the same time. You can't just wait for all of this to happen and then roll out AI applications, right? So what I see kind of a trend of is it really depends on how mature an organization has been with their data labeling process. That really will influence heavily on what types of applications they can actually build out with AI. So just to give you an example of that in a bit more detail, a lot of companies want to build out really cool AI applications. They have really good ideas on how it will basically be embedded into their core business offerings in this case. However, they're not able to do it. And the main reason for that is because a lot of the data that they want to use for AI, they haven't really vetted it yet. They haven't put any labeling in place. You don't know what data is sensitive versus what data is not sensitive. So they've really been restricted from a security standpoint, from a privacy standpoint, from a governance standpoint. They've been restricted to only using data that's known to be safe. So that's what they can use when they're talking with their chatbots or using more kind of a internal kind of a Copilot applications. It's really been restricting the actual business use case that they can work on. And now there's a huge flow of, hey, how do we get this data labeled as quickly as possible to make sure that we can actually use it for more advanced use cases as well. So that is one that I would say is the biggest thing here. The other big part to this is the opposite part, where some companies have gone out and rolled out these applications where they don't know what data it can access, right? You have a chat bot application that has access to a lot of different assets within your organization. And there is a worry there that, hey, does this have access to more stuff than it should have access to? And really where this comes down to is a lot of times what happens is you as an employee within a company, you might have access to a lot more stuff than you thought you would have access to. It's more so just security by obfuscation. You'll probably just never stumble upon that document or that Excel sheet or whatever it might be in this case. But with the world of AI and just a couple of clicks, it will go and search every asset that it has access to, and it can come back with results. So this is a big concern for organizations. They saw this happen. They had to actually roll back and kind of scale down deployments as well, just to make sure that we're still meeting and basically these data leakage is not a big issue for them. And I would say really in general for AI, data leakage is probably one of the top 1 to 2 kind of biggest concerns we see from companies today in enterprises.
Cool. Wow. Yeah. Can you talk through some examples of what are enterprises using AI for? So, what kind of AI workflows, AI agents? Do you have any sort of use cases that you've seen be maybe any trends there?
Yeah, definitely. I would say the first one, of course, is more so just like this chat style application, but really embedding that and connecting that with business flows in this case. So, for example, like within like an AHR department or a finance department, connecting that chatbot application instead of just having it run this generic model on the internet, actually connecting it with your actual files in this case. So it has access to all your Excel documents, your Word documents, your different Office applications in this case. Then actually seeing like it makes it so you can be more efficient. You don't have to go one by one. You can actually see a summary of results directly with that connected workflow. So that's more on the business side, I would say. And then definitely on the engineering and R&D and application development teams, we're seeing AI being embedded directly within your IDE environments as well. So this is really a kind of a common practice now in more kind of advanced software companies in this case, where you have AI basically integrated directly within the IDE environment, kind of to help pair program with you in this case, automate building out tests and doing a lot of like basically other advancements, having it really directly integrated within your workflow as well. So that is what I would say would be the top kind of 1 to 2 biggest and most common use cases I've seen. Aside from that, though, really like just looking at companies and what their core purpose is, right? If you're thinking about a banking company and thinking about their core processes, a lot of these banking companies are thinking through, hey, how do we automate or how do we build better end-to-end flows when it comes to basically leveraging AI? And you'll see that with every single sector that exists, they're thinking through the core business elements. How do we embed AI into this case as well? So that's a newer trend. It's still much more newer, I would say, and still we're still seeing it roll out for the first time in kind of production use cases.
Can you talk me through some examples or some trends that you've seen where AI agents or AI workflows are particularly useful? So around sort of these processes. So I know from the coding side, there's a lot going on there. So maybe we'll look at that one afterwards. But in general, are there particular use cases or scenarios where it's not as useful as people think? I'm speaking now to a lot of people, and recently the kind of feedback that I've been receiving is that people in some cases, and these are people who are like early adopters of these AI systems, and in some cases they were using AI very much for a lot of things, generically speaking, and now they're kind of cutting back on some things. They're kind of saying, okay, and AI is not as good for this or this or this. I'm wondering, what are some of the trends that you've seen where maybe AI isn't as great to be used, and what are the things on the other hand, what are the things where it's great?
Yeah, definitely. It is definitely a problem that we've seen as well, right? With enterprises, this has definitely been the case as well, rolling stuff out very quickly and then seeing that, hey, the results or the output that we were expecting wasn't quite meeting the mark there. And I think some of this stuff will naturally fix itself over time as well, right? This idea of like AI agents is still fairly new, and the actual models themselves are getting better and better every day. We're seeing, hundreds or thousands of new open source models being rolled out on like a very regular basis as well. So that will of course be part of it. But in terms of what you're mentioning, that's definitely a big part of this as well. Like in terms of where I've seen it really well used are the types of applications I mentioned to you, right? Within IDE environments, within kind of business processes and business flows, right? Like, hey, help me start this document or help me get a template for X, Y, and Z, right? With these chat kind of applications and connect it to general workflows. But where at least I'm still newer to seeing like full end-to-end workflows worked out, or like what I had mentioned, right? Like where companies are trying to embed this in their core business applications, right? Like thinking through a whole end-to-end process. And really some of the limitations, and again, like this is specific to sector, right? Like if you look at a finance company versus a healthcare company, the actual business applications and like the flows that they're building are very different, but the problems are fairly similar, I would say. Like in this case, like the main problems I hear are, hey, we are dealing with a hallucination, for example, from these AI models, right? And in some areas, that is just you can't have any tolerance for it, right? Some data you need to be accurate out of the gate. You can't really have inaccurate data in this case, right? So that's a big part to it as well. Anything that deals with hardware, of course, and real infrastructure, that's where, of course, there's challenges with AI automation in this case. So that's what I would say would be like the top kind of a couple that I'm seeing. But when it comes to just general like day-to-day processes, where it's more so like not replacing the whole process, rather being supplemental to something, right? Like where there's still a human element involved, but just as a supplemental piece, you're using AI to help basically run an automation where you'll still have an element of human verification come into play, right? That's where it's still I'm seeing very well used. And again, that ties in with the business application I mentioned with finance teams or HR teams or product teams, for example, writing out documents, for example. There's always a human review, all the way to engineering and R&D, where if AI model, for example, is doing a pull request for some security issue it's automatically resolving, there's always a human element of, hey, somebody needs to review that code, make sure it's actually safe and secure before going in, right? So we're not at that level of kind of full automation. Really, I view it more so as kind of supplemental to the human operation rather than completely end-to-end automation. At least that's where I see it today.
Great. And in terms of using AI for AI assisted coding, from the IDE side, um, how much how are you seeing that being used in enterprises? Because, there's this concept of vibe coding, where it's just sort of letting the AI do things. But in enterprise environments and in production environments, that's not a good idea. You can't really do that. How are you seeing enterprises doing this? And maybe if there's any practices from Microsoft that you've seen that are like, okay, this is kind of a best practice that they're becoming industry trends as well, in terms of how much to use AI for AI assisted coding, where and when and what when not to again.
Yeah, definitely. I would say the really interesting part here is top down from companies, and this includes Microsoft as well as other companies as well, right? Like the biggest trend is they're doing a lot of investment into AI. So they're also now recording how the adoption has been within their actual teams as well. So if you take, for example, like engineering teams and R&D departments, a lot of companies are actually measuring and they want to hit certain goals that, hey, I want this many of my development teams to actually be using AI day to day. And we want to make sure there's ways to check this, right? Like, hey, how many people have installed these AI applications with their ID environments? How many PRs include automated or AI generated code, for example, right? So these are actual measurable outcomes. And a lot of the leaders at many of these software companies, for example, are actually measuring based on those things as well. So that's how I would see a lot of this usage comes into play. But again, more so on the supplemental side. So you had mentioned some things like vibe coding. There's certain like the companies that build applications for that as well. I've never seen or heard of any company or enterprise using that for any type of production use case. So again, that's just me. I haven't heard of one personally. It's more so at the level of, hey, you still have engineering teams, you still have R&D teams. They're building out the applications. It's just to use this as kind of a supplemental driver to help um, basically write code faster in this case, right? Or automate parts of coding that they don't need to do by hand, for example. So automating unit test creation or other types of elements as well. So that's where I see the biggest kind of trend. I have seen this like vibe coding, like these applications used for smaller scale things that won't ever make it to production, just like rapid prototyping, for example, or just to show end-to-end examples. So that's where I've seen that kind of come into play, but nothing at like a production use case, for example.
Yeah. Yeah, that's really interesting. And some of those kind of best practices around how to do sort of AI engineering or AI as code kind of properly. I think it's, yeah, very, very interesting. Um, so I want to switch gears, and we've touched on it already around AI security. But let's talk a little bit more in depth about that. So you've mentioned a few of the risks already, but can you go a little bit more into deploying when somebody is deploying AI, what are the risks? And there are so many different ways to cover this, but what are some of the biggest things that you're seeing that are kind of topical?
Want to hack an AI in 30 seconds? At sunnylabs.ai, we built a playground where you can learn how prompt injections work and why they're the biggest threat to AI systems today. Try real attack techniques, see them succeed in real time, and understand exactly how hackers are breaking into AI chatbots and agents right now. It's completely free. Just register at sunnylabs.ai and start hacking instantly on the playground. No experience needed. You'll be amazed at what you can break. Sunnylabs.ai. Learn to hack AI before someone hacks yours.
Yeah, definitely. I would say the biggest concern is by far data leakage in this case, right? And it's already happening. Like we're seeing customer data or source code or internal strategy documents, right, being fed into these generative AI applications. And that's already happening in this case, right? So companies are now struggling to make sure that, hey, how do we prevent that from actually happening? How do we actually vet what data is going into these AI models? Um, so that's a huge part of this as well. And that's where I think companies struggle most. And that's where you're also seeing rollback of like AI applications. Companies, enterprises are very strict about where their data can go, right? Again, thinking back to like the regulatory compliance standards as well, right? They have to meet certain data residency and requirements as well, right? As a company. So they're very wary of this as well. They want to make sure that whatever AI models their company employees are using are vetted and they're only using the ones that they're allowed to, right? Not just some generic model use. Like, for example, if you use just like chatgpt.com, for example, without being signed in, that's more meant for consumer base. It's not meant for enterprise companies, right? That's not meant to be fed any sensitive data in this case, but that can happen. Like employees, they might not know where their data is actually going in this case, right? So it's a real struggle for a lot of companies. So they're being very tactical on how do they lock down access. So it's kind of a balance. There's, of course, a part of, hey, we want to make sure that we vet data. We want to make sure that we have a structured process in place. But on the other side, you can't lock it down too much, right? You can't make it too restrictive. Otherwise, people just won't use it as well, right? So they're still figuring out, hey, what are the best practices? How do we make sure that we have an easy way for our employees to actually have access to this? So that's definitely a big problem, but data leakage is by far the biggest problem, I would say, right? So I had mentioned the part about just feeding in sensitive data into these AI applications, but beyond that, as I had mentioned, right, you're connecting AI applications to different parts of your organization, and what data they have access to is a huge concern as well. So that's definitely by far the biggest one I've seen. Beyond that, there's also just a general problem of just shadow AI. In this case, a lot of companies and security teams, they just don't know what AI applications are even out there within their company, right? So they don't know what their employees are using in terms of interacting with, right? I gave examples of, hey, maybe there's some AI applications that are meant for more consumer audiences that are being used for actual enterprise use cases, right? So that's a huge concern. All the way to, hey, development teams are actually building AI applications or training AI models, but those models themselves haven't been vetted or don't, may not be meeting the security criteria that the security teams are laying out. So definitely a big issue. Beyond that, there's of course many novel risks when it comes to AI as well, right? We're thinking like prompt injection style attacks or different types of way that attackers are thinking through how to get around these AI models, right? Supply chain security becomes a huge risk when it comes to AI security. So these are other big trends that we're seeing as well.
Uh, can you talk about actually, first of all, can you describe what you mean by supply chain security, actually? And what are some of the trends that you're seeing there?
Yeah, definitely. In the kind of world of supply chain security and when it comes to AI,
For
yeah,
AI. Yeah.
yeah, specifically for AI, one of the bigger trends that we're seeing is like companies are now more reliant on open source models as well, right? Which wasn't really the case like a year or so back. A year or so back, you see a lot of companies are more focused on just taking more proprietary models out of the gate, right? So your open AI models, or other companies have kind of proprietary models as well, and just leveraging those. But now we're seeing an emergence of the amount of open source models that are being created for custom use cases, right? So if you go to Hugging Face, for example, which is a large kind of open source model repository, you'll see that thousands of new models are being created on just a regular basis, right? And these are more like specific models for very specific use cases, right? It's not just some generic model. It's, hey, I want to do an XYZ operation. It's a model built specifically for that. So we're seeing a lot more basically a need that customers want to use those types of models as well, right? It'll help build more specific fine-tuned applications, right? So that's a big part to it. But when it comes to supply chain security, you can basically think that, hey, if we're just pulling this random model from the internet in this case, right? Not a proprietary model that we can not necessarily completely trust, but we can have more trust in, right? From a company standpoint, there needs to be a proper vetting process in this case. And this is really no different. There are certain elements that are unique, but it's not too different than traditional supply chain security elements as well, right? Back in the day when, or even now, like when development teams are pulling libraries that they haven't wrote, right, in this case, and pulling that into their code, they need to have a way to actually vet this to make sure, hey, nobody's embedded malware. These are actually, it is a secure library in this case. The same exact flow for AI models as well, right? When you think about an AI model, you have the actual model itself, right? That includes the model weights, the data that it's trained on as well, right? So all of this is what's composed and makes up a model in this case. You need to vet all of those areas as well. So that's kind of the supply chain piece as well. A big part of AI models is also the data that's connected to it, right? The grounding data that you're actually feeding to train the model. So making sure that data is secure, as well as a huge element to this as well, and making sure that that data doesn't ever leave the boundaries that you want it to leave. So there are those elements of supply chain security that really come into play when it comes to AI security as well.
Yeah, 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 very much agree. Could you talk through some of the tactical ways that some of these risks can be reduced, if not even if even mitigated?
Yeah, I would say the biggest way that I see companies kind of roll this out is again, they treat this similar to other areas of cybersecurity where they have a dedicated team or governance process where they're laying out what are the security best practices that we want our organization to follow. And again, it will really differ per organization, right? Again, based on the risk tolerance in this case. So that's really the first and foremost thing is kind of treating AI security similar to how you treat other parts of your core security within the organization as well. Um, but beyond that, in terms of like actually in practice, how do we actually roll this out? How do we make this a real process in this case? Similar to other areas of security, typically enterprises will just rely on best practices rolled out from kind of leading open source reports in this case, right? So, for example, the OWASP organization is a very trusted organization within the security community, and in this case, they usually have a list or best practices on, hey, if you're building out LLM applications for the very first time, these are the types of risks that you need to be most wary of in this case, right? So companies like or organizations like OWASP, they've already done a lot of research looking into attacks, looking into how attackers think and how they'll exploit AI applications. So companies basically trust that. They're like, hey, from a security standpoint, this is going to be our best practice guide. We want to make sure that if we were to build a solution in house or even buy a solution in this case, how well does it benchmark to these risks outlined in something like a OWASP top 10 for LLMs in this case, right? And that will cover everything I mentioned here, right? The shadow AI piece, having a good process to inventory and catalog AI models, to data leakage processes, how to have a proper data governance, all the way to more novel risks for AI as well, like prompt injection and thinking through runtime security as well.
Yeah. I think OWASP is very good. I think one challenge with the OWASP lists is that AI is moving so fast that it's very hard to kind of stay on top of it. So, I think in particular, even since the last time the OWASP top 10 list for AI applications was updated, AI agents have become significantly bigger. And, things like we now have like AI IDEs and so on, and the likes of Visual Studio Code and Cursor and Windsor, Plot Code, all of those. So that's sometimes again those kind of recommendations can take a little bit of time to catch up to the reality. Yeah.
Yeah.
Any thoughts on that?
No, that's definitely the case as well. I think the how fast AI is moving and how fast enterprise want to adopt it, definitely like security is still catching up in that realm as well. But in general, like what how most organizations, at least I've seen, approach this is they treat AI very similar to how they would treat other new trends and technology as well, right? As long as you have a very solid inventory, you have an understanding and catalog of all the AI models that exist in this case, along with understanding what data is available through those AI models and who has access to that data, that's kind of your core principles that you need to solve in this case, right? And that itself is a very tough challenge. So a lot of companies, they have a lot of focus just on solving that challenge, as I mentioned, right? Like data labeling, making sure that you have an understanding of what data is out there. And if they don't have that confidence, right? Again, this depends on how risk averse the company is. They just won't roll out an AI application in this case. And I've talked to many enterprises that has been the case, right? So these risks, for example, that you're mentioning, they are saying, hey, that's not worth us taking the risk. We'd rather just not roll out the AI application. We'll restrict AI to only those smaller use cases, the data sets that we know are not confidential, don't have any sensitive data. We'll restrict all of your AI usage just to that, right? So that's where I'm seeing like it really again depends on the company itself, how risk averse they are, but that's kind of a way to kind of think about it as well. In this case, we're treating it very similar to other parts of security as well, or at least caught like bringing up those trends, like the same way that you would think about securing any new area, you think about for AI as well.
Are there any additional trends that moving forward into the future that you expect might happen?
In terms of AI or AI security?
Yeah, in terms of anything that particularly stands out.
Um, yeah, I would say that the biggest trend is like kind of what we're seeing with AI agents in this case, right? We're moving away from just kind of chatbot style applications to really AI being integrated as part of your overall application itself. So now we're going to see, at least in my view, I think we'll see AI as more part of your typical application security architecture in this case, right? So even when you think about all of cloud security, the main focus has always been from our development team, like, hey, I have a cloud application. that cloud application could be composed of a couple of VMs, a couple of containers, a storage account, um, a key vault, for example, right? Connecting all those together, that's your cloud application. And companies have always had that vision of, hey, I just want to secure that cloud application. I don't want to think about VM security and isolation. I don't want to think about container security and isolation or storage security and isolation, right? So that's a big trend that we've seen in cloud security. We're going to see that AI is going to become a huge integral part of that as well, right? At the end of the day, if you are running AI, it's always going to be fronted by some API, for example, right? So you have to do the same API security measures that you do for general cloud application. That AI application will always be connected to some grounding data as well, whether that's a storage account or some blob or some other type of storage mechanism. So you'll have to do the same type of security mechanism for that as well. So really embedding AI security as part of your core application security, I think will be the kind of a bigger trend that we'll see come across here in a bit as well.
Yeah, yeah, that's I think that makes sense, and it follows kind of other patterns that we've seen in the past. Okay, so last question for you, Harris, and that is, how are you using AI yourself to help you to become more performative in your job? Even though I already know you're very efficient, but what are you finding that you're loving about AI?
Yeah, I would say it's very interesting to see, even for myself, when I realize like this has been out actually for a couple of years now, which is kind of crazy to even think about. Like that this been kind of a normal use case now for a couple of years. But um, the biggest thing is like in my day-to-day operations, right? Like writing new documents, for example, any template document I want to build, or even if I just have a couple of ideas, right? It's sometimes hard to get the ground started when it comes to authoring a doc, for example. So I always use AI or something like to basically help ground an idea and come up with a template for a document, for example. So that's something I use on a very day-to-day process. In the product management space as well, a lot of times if you have an idea, it's always great to think about, hey, how can I build a prototype for this? How can I actually think through an end-to-end use case? So that's been something that's actually been really easy and very efficient to enable through AI as well, like building out a small scale application just to kind of showcase a full end-to-end prototype of, hey, this is what we're kind of looking for. So um, I would say those are the bigger ones, but really in any type of like it's kind of hard for me to think about like areas where AI isn't being used, like even small things like joining meetings, for example, right? You'll always have like a AI transcript in the back and reading the AI summary of meetings. So this is something I've just gotten used to now. It's kind of taken for granted now, but like if I miss a meeting, for example, just seeing the AI summary and seeing all the notes, for example, that's something I do on a day-to-day basis. So really in all the different types of like day-to-day processes I've been doing, I do see AI supplementing it to some degree for the most part. So that's been at least really cool for me. As well, it's interesting for me, like where I now move away from just general search engines. Like I've seen myself use it less and using more just chatbot style applications just for general questions as well. So that's always on my kind of personal usage side of it.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I love that. Yeah, I think there's so many use cases now with AI, and you're right. It's just becoming like commonplace. It's just normal to just always have some kind of AI usage on your day to day, and it's you don't even think about it anymore. That's probably the trend as well. That's probably what's going to happen in the future. AI will continue to be used more and more, and with that, it needs to be secured as well. So, thank you so much for this podcast, Harris. It has been super interesting. It's been great hearing about some of the trends that you're seeing specifically in Microsoft with enterprises adopting AI and how they're looking at AI security and some of the trends there and trends for the future. So thank you, Harris. And also thank you to our listeners. As always, if you enjoyed this episode, then please make sure to like it, follow us, and also make sure to share it with your friends as well. So thank you so much. And thank you, Harris.
Thanks for watching this episode of the AI Hacks Podcast. If you like this episode and want to see more, we release new episodes every week, so be sure to check us out wherever you watch your podcasts. And don't forget to check out sunnylabs.ai to secure your AI agents today. Thanks for watching.